when I was 18, I graduated from high school. I wound up going to the United States Air Force Academy. Now, I'll tell you the truth about this. That to get to the academy, you have to have a congressional appointment. You have to be appointed by a congressman or a senator. And I got an appointment. I was living in Washington, D.C. I got an appointment from our local, we had a delegate to the U.S. Senate. There is no, believe it or not, Washington, D.C. still has no congressional representation. So it used to say, I'm not sure if it still says, on Washington, D.C. license plates, taxation without representation, because there are no representatives. They have no voting delegate to the Congress. But there was a delegate who could sit in and speak and be heard, give his opinions, but couldn't vote. And he had the same right to appoint 2 people. Each congressman and senator can appoint 2 people. So Washington, D.C. only gets 2 appointments per year because there's only 1 delegate. And I got one of them in 1979. But the academy rejected me because my grade point average was too low. Because I was smoking a lot of pot from the time I was 14 until from 1975 to 1979. So I had very high SAT scores, and I met all the other requirements, but my grades were too low. And they sent me to the U.S. Air Force Academy Prep School, which is on the same campus. It's a 16,000-acre campus on the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. It's spectacularly beautiful if you haven't been to Colorado Springs. Anyway, the first year was great at the prep school. When I went to the academy the next year as a freshman, and I'd gone in maybe at about 155 or 160 pounds, something like that. And they had us up early and very active, and I was losing weight and had trouble maintaining my weight. And at lunch and dinner as a freshman, we would sit with our squadrons, and the upperclassmen would harass us. You've probably all seen military academy movies where they harass the freshmen. That's what happens. So you go to eat something, they'd ask you a question, you were supposed to swallow it within 3 chews or something, 5, it's only supposed to chew like 3 to 5 times, I forget what it was. It made it really hard to get very much food in. At breakfast every day, we were left alone. We could eat with our friends, we could talk, we couldn't talk at any other meals. We could talk to our friends, we could sit with whoever we wanted to. And breakfast was a big buffet. So every day for breakfast, for a year, I ate a dozen fried eggs, a ½ pound of bacon, a huge stack of pancakes, a big bowl of grits, a huge plate of fried potatoes, and other stuff like some bread, some rolls, sometimes whatever. I mean, it was crazy. I have no idea how many calories it was. I have no idea. I don't think I want to know how much cholesterol it was. It was insane. I was probably eating 3,000-4,000 calories at that meal, and trying to make up for the hard time I was having getting food in. Now, by the way, because I actually lost weight, was having trouble gaining weight, they put me on a weight gain table where the upperclassmen there didn't harass us as much. So for probably half the year or more, I wasn't even under the same conditions as the other freshmen. I was at a much easier situation because I could just eat without being harassed all the time. And when we left the dining hall after dinner at around 7 o'clock, those of us in the weight gain section were allowed to go back through the line and pick up a bagged meal for later on. A sandwich, some potato chips, an apple, and some cookies to have an 8 or 9 o'clock meal. So I got 4 meals a day. But that was my breakfast every day. Crazy. In fact, the year before, it wasn't quite as sick, but I was at the Air Force Academy Prep School, and sometime around probably January, February, the wrestling coach stood up in front of an assembly of all of the preppies, as we were called, and said, wrestling season starts on Monday. You're all welcome to come out for the team. And the Air Force Academy at the time, I don't know what it's like now, they recruited heavily for wrestling. So, in fact, the prep school was kind of interesting. It was an interesting place because the academy had students that they wanted for various reasons, like these star athletes. I had a roommate at the prep school the whole year, we were assigned roommates. We did not get to choose. This guy was a little Nazi from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. He was the Idaho State 1 and 2 mile champion. He was class valedictorian. And in the U.S., we have what are called the SATs, Scholastic Aptitude Test for college. If you sign your name correctly, you get like a 400 or something. You know, he had like a 450. So he got most points for signing his name correctly. You know, it was 800. It was an 800-point test. But I guess he didn't have a lot of competition there to be class valedictorian. So he was my roommate because he was the state 1 and 2 mile champion, running champion, and they wanted him for the cross-country team. We had a whole bunch of wrestlers. We had wrestlers from California, Iowa, Idaho, Nevada, maybe a couple other states that were the champions, state champions in their weight class that the academy had recruited, but their grade point averages or their SAT scores were too low, which was my roommate was there because in order to get into the academy, you had to have a minimum SAT score, and his SATs were too low. You also had to have a minimum grade point average, which is why I was there, because my grade point average was too low, even though my SAT scores were fine. In fact, because so many students were there because of their SAT scores, as a group, there were probably 300 or 400 of us. We had to take the SAT scores every other month. We had to take the SAT test every other month for a whole year. Took it like 5 or 6 times. My scores never changed because they started out pretty high, where everybody else was able to, you know, most people were able to bring them up. So we also had a group of students who were there because they had gone directly into the military after high school. And the Air Force Academy, all the military academies in the U.S. have a rule that if you've been out of high school for more than 2 years, you have to go to the prep school before you can go to the academy. They want you to get back into studying before you can go to the academy. And then they had a small group of people like me who had the aptitude but just hadn't done the work in a while. And that's why we were there. So I was in a kind of a small minority there. So we had this amazing wrestling team. And he said to us, you know, if you've never wrestled before, we're going to beat the shit out of you every day. But by the end of the season, you'll be stronger than you've ever been. And I said, okay, I'm up for that. And it was true. They beat the crap out of us. And first of all, wrestling trainings every day were 3 hours long. It was so intense, I couldn't believe it. And has anyone here ever wrestled? Everyone been in a wrestling match? Official match? See one. If you've never done it, or anyone boxed, I also boxed. In the academy, you have to box. You know, if you think that 3 or 4 minutes isn't very long, get into a boxing ring or a wrestling match and see what it's like when you're using every single muscle. I mean, wrestling is amazingly intense because everything is completely, maximum for 3 or 4 minutes. It's a long, long time. But anyway, because I was basically just a body for them to practice on, I wasn't worried about my weight. You know, most of the wrestlers, I mean, we had all these championship wrestlers, they had to maintain their weight within their weight class. I wasn't worried about that. But even these guys, because we were burning so many calories, we would come back and we'd finish wrestling training after everybody else was finished dinner. So we had the dining hall to ourselves. And I would eat so much after training, after practice every night, that I would go back to my room and I would lay in my bed in severe pain for about an hour. And that would finally subside and I could do something. But it was every single day. And it wasn't like I was stuffing myself on purpose. I mean, I guess I kind of was, but it was partly because I left there feeling so exhausted and enervated and thinking I needed a whole bunch of food. So, and I was probably wrong. I mean, I'm sure it wasn't helping me at all. But again, that year, I was probably at dinner that year, during that 3 or 4 months, I probably ate an easy 3,000 calories per meal every night for dinner. So, crazy stuff. That's my, and in fact, you know what? Like a lot of people, I came to my overeating. I mean, and this really is an eating disorder, right? I mean, it may not be a clinically described eating disorder. I wasn't anorexic or anything like that, but this is a serious problem. An eating disorder simply means you have an unhealthy relationship with food. I would suggest a lot of people qualify under that definition. And the way it happens for a lot of people is probably similar to what happened for me. You know, again, I've talked about this with you guys. Our parents do the best they can, but they weren't able to do a perfect job because they didn't get perfectly parented by their parents. You know, again, they were probably missing one primary thing: unconditional love. So my father was barely around when I was a little kid. He started his practice. He was a very successful architect. He started his practice when I was 2 years old, and he was working most of the time. And if he was home, the last thing he was interested in was parenting. My mother was not really emotionally available. You know, she wasn't getting what she needed from her relationship. She wasn't available to us, and I got attention from two places. Originally, it was for my academic prowess. When I was a little kid, straight A's all the time. That's, you know, I felt loved when I brought home my report card, primarily. You know, when I was praised for how intelligent I was. Later on, it became, I began to get attention for how much food I could eat. And I may have told you guys this before, but I grew 10 inches, which is 25 centimeters in 1 year, between my 14th and 15th birthday. I grew 25 centimeters without gaining a pound, and desperately wanted to start gaining weight. So although I'd always eaten a fair amount, I purposely upped the ante, started eating as much as possible. And I got a lot of attention for it. It was the, look how much this kid can eat sort of thing. And I was just eating it up, right? It would just spur me on to eat even more. So, I mean, again, I'm sure between the ages of probably 14 and 18, I consumed ridiculous amounts of food as well. Crazy. And I'm sure it probably contributed to the fact that I got very, very sick later on because I had overtaxed my system in a dramatic way, processing all that food. Now, the drugs didn't help. You know, the being out late, not getting enough sleep didn't help. And I believe that all the years I was swimming didn't help either, because I swam competitively for many years and spent a lot of time in swimming pools, chlorinated pools. So chlorine is very toxic, and I think that probably contributed as well. But I think it was all those things that came together to create what eventually showed up at 23, where I got so sick.